Last time on Lords of Death.
Well, when you said, possibly the serial murder, taught me to tie my shoes, that was poetic. I totally got what you meant.
Just a failed robbery. But when Homer refused to give him any money, that Homer got stabbed and she got stabbed and he took off.
Everywhere you heard, oh my God, they made put a screwdriver through the skull of an old lady would kill anybody. So I think everybody was scared to death. Small little town.
It'll happen to somebody else. I don't know, Arnold. I don't know who it was.
And Mick told me that it stood for Lord of Death, and that in order to get the tattoo, you have to take a soul.
Don't dig in so deep. You get yourself into a trap with them.
People like that are capable of doing anything. And that's where the fear comes in.
If they let that man go, they are turning an animal out into the flock. And whatever happens is on their head, not ours. He always had a thing with torturing animals. Always. The more he could make them hurt, the better he liked it. Putting tacks into them to see how many it could take to kill them. He was weird about something like that. I always thought it was just something crazy in his head, But if you keep on going the way that you're going, you will know everything very soon.
From Dayton, Ohio, I'm Thrasher Banks. This is Lords of Death. The morning after Leila's murder, on October 26th of 1988, her neighbors knew something was wrong. Just before the sun came up, everyone could see all the lights from her house beaming through the crisp fall leaves during a time of the morning when the area was usually still dark. The light permeating through the tree line was so out of place that one neighbor thought the Potts residence was on fire. By mid-morning, one of Leila's nieces arrived to pick her up for a day of shopping, but when she didn't get a response at the door, she saw the broken basement window and feared the worst. She ran to the nearest neighbor's house and phoned the sheriff's department and had an officer arrive. Upon arrival, the officer immediately knew something was wrong. He saw the flattened tire on Leila's car and entered the home through the same broken window Leila's assailants broke out. He could see the bloody footprints throughout the upstairs of the house, and there was a chest freezer with a hammer and a gardening tool sitting on it, covered in blood and hair. The drawers in the kitchen were covered with bloody handprints, and the house appeared to be ransacked. When he reached the bedroom, the bed was covered in blood, and Leila was lying on the floor with a screwdriver protruding from her temple. It was apparent the attack on Leila was brutal and carried out by individuals who had no regard for human life. Apart from the screwdriver being lodged into her skull, there were a dozen other wounds. There were 2 superficial wounds from separate attempts to drive the screwdriver into her head, 2 knife wounds to the right side of her neck, several smaller cuts to her neck from a knife, another knife wound in her lower abdomen. Her hands and forearms were covered in defensive wounds. An additional 2 deep stab wounds went through the back of her neck and into her lungs, and there were several puncture wounds from the screwdriver across her back and other injuries to her head from the hammer. When Van Horn and Sheriff Carpenter arrived, they videotaped the scene and called in the Ohio Bureau of Investigation to assist in analyzing the crime scene. Despite the amount of evidence collected, the investigation came up empty-handed. Leila's murder and Homer's murder 20 months prior in the same home remain unsolved today. The community was torn apart by the Potts murders, and the effects can still be felt there today. Before the murders, it was a tight-knit area. Everyone left their doors unlocked, and neighbors trusted each other. In the aftermath, the Potts family and friends all had theories about who was responsible. Some alleged the family was involved, and others claimed it was a neighbor. The trust in the community was broken, and fear took hold when the perpetrators were never identified. There's little doubt that Homer and Leela's murders were connected, but no one knew who the real enemy was. I talked with Arnold Van Horn about his recollection of Leela's murder.
The night that she was killed, there was no reports, no activity whatsoever that we knew of. It wasn't until the next day when I believe she was a cousin, but anyhow, it was some relation that went to the house and couldn't get any answer. So that's when she called the sheriff's department, and Sergeant Warner actually went through, because they had broke out a window, so Sergeant Warner crawled through that window and found her, that she was where she'd been stabbed several times. And it was a robbery, and of course they broke a window out and came through her basement, and then she heard them. So she was there. They come through the basement door, but she's got this plastic flashlight. So she fought him with that big plastic flashlight, which a plastic flashlight against a knife is not the best weapon. Of course, the flashlight just blew apart. So she was pretty well defenseless. Everybody knew she had money, so that's what they was there for.
What would it take to get this case prosecuted in 2018?
A miracle.
A miracle?
A miracle. Somebody coming forth and saying, hey, he confessed to me, or they confessed to me, and I'm willing to testify. And the longer the time goes, the more people die off, and their memories, just like me, you don't remember all the details and stuff. So, but it'd take a miracle.
While the investigation into Leela's murder was underway, Tim and Jim were planning to leave Guernsey County and go to West Palm Beach, Florida to start a new life. They each kept a handgun from the gun store robbery and filed the serial numbers off and dumped the rest of the guns on Jim's brother John. By the end of October, Tim, his wife, Jim, John, and Margaret took 2 vehicles and headed south on I-77 to Florida. They were leaving behind a town gripped with fear, with no regard for the family they tore apart, while eluding desperate investigators who wanted nothing but to catch the culprits. On the way down to Florida, they partied and celebrated their recent exploits as they traveled towards their destination. The Lords of Death referred to their crime spree as the Big Three, and several sources have told me that they bragged about what they did in Guernsey County and had no remorse for their crimes. This is the same trip to Florida that Mick told Van Horn about, where they were rumored to have killed the hitchhiker. Apart from Mick's statement about this, several other sources have confirmed that they boasted about killing someone on the way to Florida. The details I have about this crime are so vague, I haven't been able to find an unsolved murder case that fits the description. After arriving in West Palm Beach, the party didn't last long. By November 3rd, Tim was caught stealing from a store and was subsequently arrested for retail theft. He pled guilty, was given a court date, and was released from jail. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday night, Jim and Margaret were driving on Ocean Boulevard in West Palm Beach and were pulled over for speeding in a silver 1982 AMC Concorde with a loud muffler. The officers arrested Jim and Margaret and confiscated the pistol and a box of ammunition. The serial number on the pistol was filed down, but there's little doubt that this was one of Hinthorn's guns from the robbery the month before in Ohio. Jim was charged with possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, and shortly after was bailed out of jail. Rather than face the consequences of their actions, the group decided to leave Florida and headed back to Guernsey County. Once they arrived back in Guernsey County, the Lords of Death were out of resources from posting bail in Florida and agreed to go to Noble County for one last robbery to get them back on their feet. Their hopes were to acquire enough cash and cigarettes to keep them going while they reestablished themselves in Ohio. Margaret agreed to accompany them and assist as long as she got her share of whatever loot they acquired. They took Tim's wife's silver AMC Concorde with a loud muffler and set out from Byesville to find a suitable location to plunder. Tim dropped Jim and Margaret off at a small carryout in Noble County. Jim pried the door open with a crowbar, and him and Margaret started to ransack the store. Margaret filled up paper bags with cartons of cigarettes while Jim looked for the cash. Tim pulled back around and flashed his headlights to signal for Jim and Margaret. After this, they drove to a nearby cemetery and were unhappy with how little cash they found, so they decided they were going to go back to Henthorne's gun store and attempt to break in again since it had been such a success back in October. They hid the car, and Tim covered his face with a t-shirt, and Margaret used a bandana. Margaret was the lookout, while Jim checked the perimeter, and Tim attempted to pry the front door open with a crowbar. Tim struggled to get the door open, so Jim came around to assist. At this point, Margaret thought she heard someone loading a gun and alerted Tim and Jim, but they dismissed this and opened the door anyways. Margaret and Tim entered the store while Jim waited outside armed with a pistol. Once Tim got to the cash register, a man yelled "freeze," and Margaret ran out of the store. Tim was held up at gunpoint, and the owner, Henthorne, made him get on the ground. Henthorne approached Tim and smashed his head under his foot and asked him who else was with him. Tim refused to answer, and Henthorne fired a warning shot next to Tim's head. Jim heard this and thought Tim had been shot, and in anger fired 3 shots into the storefront and fled on foot, leaving Margaret behind. When the Noble County Sheriff, Landon Smith, arrived, he knew Jim would try to get to his sister's house in nearby Bell Valley. Landon went and waited for him there, and by the end of the night, Tim, Jim, and Margaret were arrested. For the second time in a month, law enforcement had the Lords of Death within their grasp. After their arrest, it didn't take long before Margaret began telling the police about the gun store robbery from October. She said she witnessed Tim and Jim bring a duffel bag full of guns into her and John's trailer and stash them in a closet. A few days after this, she claimed that John and his friend, who I refer to as Leo, took the guns and dumped them in a creek before they fled to Florida. Leo, for the second time in a month, was approached by law enforcement and questioned about crimes he didn't commit. Leo told Noble County Police about the day him and John took the guns down to the creek and dumped them. The sheriff asked him if he could take them down to the creek and show him where the guns were dumped.
And to this day, I could show you the creek. And then he said, I tell you what, I believe every word you say, but I got to find something to back. You go with my deputy. If you find one, it's our problem. They'll bring you home, and you can go home, go to bed, and get ready to go work again. So I was working like 2 or 3 jobs at the time. So we went out to a creek out on, I don't even know the number of the road, outside of Sayersville, Ohio. And he's sitting there trying to tell me, no, I don't think it's here. I think you're lying. And I said, I'm telling you, I'm not an idiot. And I know it's here. About that time, he walked back down over a bank, and he said, this just might be your lucky day. Let me get a stick. And he reached in the water and pulled a pistol out.
After the guns were found, Noble County charged Tim and Jim for the 3 separate robberies, and Margaret took a deal to testify against them to avoid a prison sentence. While Margaret was in jail awaiting trial, she found out she was pregnant with John's baby. Sheriff Peanut Carpenter from Guernsey County came to see her, and when she expressed that she didn't want to keep the baby, Peanut convinced her otherwise and promised that if anything ever happened to her, he would take care of the child. Peanut became the godfather and even helped pick out the baby's name. Tim took a plea deal and agreed to plead guilty if the charges were dropped from the first gun store robbery on October 23rd. He was sentenced to 2 years to be served at Mansfield Reformatory, the same prison where Shawshank Redemption was filmed. Jim wasn't as lucky. He was charged with aggravated robbery, among other offenses, and ended up spending over 10 years in prison for his actions that night. It was shortly after this that Tim and Jim would meet Mick at Mansfield and boast about their crimes and reveal the true meaning of their Lords of Death tattoos. As my curiosity about Tim's past grew, I began reaching out to his family members to try to get a picture of what Tim was like before the crime spree in 1988. One of his cousins, Gary, agreed to tell me what he remembered about Tim in the 1980s.
Well, me and Timmy, we was known to be some bad boys around the whole Guernsey County area. We did some robberies and theft, nothing major. We robbed the school. We stole our uncle's car and went to Colorado with it, just little odds and ends. But then somewhere Timmy changed once I started hanging with him. He started hanging with and all of them, and well, they was a little bit more crazier than what I wanted to be hanging around with, so we kind of split our way. He used to be crazier than I was. I was kind of the leader in all of our craziness when we was kids. But he always had that foresight where he wanted to go that extra foot outside of the boundaries. And he always had a thing with torturing animals. Always. The more he could make them hurt, the better he liked it. I'm going to say the first thing that I ever heard about Timmy killing anybody or anything major, oh man, it was like 83 or 84. Well, Timmy said that he killed a cow and that he was visualizing it being a human. Timmy, I know he just liked to kill shit. Even growing up, he had this weird obsession with cats, putting tacks into them to see how many it could take to kill them. He was weird about something like that. I always thought it was just something crazy in his head, But, that's all that I can say on that part. Like I said, he went off somewhere when he was younger. His dad was very, very strict and abusive. You know, I'm not just going to tell you I'm going to reach back and I'm going to smack the shit out of you or I'm going to use a belt on you. So anything that Timmy had, and anger-wise, I'm going to say probably came from his dad. I left Guernsey County in '92, and the only thing that I left there was a bad memory. I'm telling you what I know. Welcome to my world, dude. He had a mean streak in him, especially towards women. Oh, shit. Tim had about 3 different sides of him. Y'all knew 1 or 2 of them. There was still 1 hidden.
I asked Gary if he thought that Tim and Jim really were involved in the Potts murders.
I think Jim went and robbed Old Man Potts for the money that he had supposedly on him. When he wouldn't give up the money and he killed the old man, he told the old lady if she didn't come up with the money, he was going to kill her. So, what she told him was, if you will let me live, I will give you all of the insurance money, which is what none of the other people even expected. It was never heard of before. Not around there. Nothing like that ever happened. A lot of people were scared. They're still worried about the same thing today. I stay out of the things that I don't need to be in, but this is something that has been scaring the hell out of Guernsey County for years. And I'm just doing what I should be doing.
I asked Gary what he knew about Leila's murder.
I was told that it was Tim, John, Margaret. I was told by Timmy, Margaret, and Jimmy both that they was all involved in Leila's murder. The 2 gals stayed outside. 1 guy stayed on the porch while the other 2 went inside, is what I was told by them.
I asked Gary if he'd heard anything about their trip to Florida and if the rumor about the hitchhiker was true.
They was running away from what all they was doing up here to start a new life. And on the way down, they picked somebody up hitchhiking and they killed him, stabbed him from what I was told by one of their crew.
I asked Gary if he knew anything about the Lords of Death tattoo and who Tim may have killed to get it.
Timmy told me that he got his because he killed somebody. It's like, dude, you're not that kind of a person. He says, you have no idea what kind of a am. And after that, yeah, I really felt leery about him. Didn't want him around me. Didn't want him around my kids. You know, no. Someone like that, you just don't want him around. I wouldn't even know. I'm going to say it was a trip that he made to Cleveland from Cambridge in late 82, early 83. All he said was he went up there, he hooked up with a gal, she turned out to be a bitch, and she didn't make it.
I asked Gary how many people he thinks that Tim and Jim could have been responsible for killing.
To be honest with you, over 20. I'm going to say anything unsolved between Cleveland and probably the Georgia-Florida line, any of those may be part of what all has happened. Like I said, I believe Timmy has done everything that he said that he's done. Man, all that I can say is, yeah, I really believe that he just went off the deep end and he'd done all this. And I believe that he done things that I don't even know about or even heard about. But yeah, you were on the right track. Timmy and Jim did kill Leela. It was all over insurance money, which Jim set up when he killed Homer. I think he is just one crazy, idiotic person in the head that don't need to be here no more. Look at a picture of him and Charles Manson side by side. Except for the tattoos on the forehead, they're brothers. If they let that man go, they are turning an animal out into the flock. And whatever happens is on their head, not ours. You're right on the money. Don't give up on what you're doing. But if you keep on going the way that you're going, you will know everything very soon. All right, to all of you involved, I'm going to make sure that you all hear this. Be ready for your consequences for your actions earlier in your life.
I have little reason to doubt Gary's claims. The story he told me corroborates similar accounts I've heard from people he mentioned specifically as possible accessories to these crimes. Margaret, if you're listening, it's time to do the right thing. The Lords of Death made threats against your life and instilled fear in you for more than 30 years, but you have something more powerful than that: the truth. Silence has led to families being torn apart and others being murdered. It's time to end the Lords of Death for good. Once everything is in the light, there'll be nothing to fear anymore.
Hard to believe that you really don't see that we need you. You're making a fool out of all of us every time you decide you are nothing. Cruising and drinking, you think that it's finally over. Nobody knows anything. Nobody but you. Hard to believe that you really don't see that we need you. You make a fool out of all of us every time you decide you are nothing.
After Margaret was released from jail following her trial for her part in the gun store robbery, she left Guernsey County and moved out of state to focus on raising her children and left behind her old life. John stayed in and out of trouble with the law following the Potts murders and was shot and killed in 2006 during a failed carjacking attempt following a brief crime spree. Jim served his 10 years in prison and has lived a relatively quiet life since being released. Him and his brother Terry became ordained ministers and founded the First Sinners Church out of Byesville. Tim served his 2 years and was released from prison in January of 1991. It's been alleged that he may have been involved in a series of murders in Akron in late 1987 and possibly another in March of 1991 when the same killer emerged. Another murder he claimed to have been responsible for was a pregnant girl named Robin Stone, who was murdered in August of 1991 in Guernsey County. This case remains unsolved today. If everything I've learned so far about the Lords of Death is true, then 2 serial killers went undetected in Ohio in the late 1980s, and their crimes need to be brought to the light. By early 1995, Tim moved to Dayton and would go on to murder Cindy Kozad in June of that year. This investigation has been more than a podcast. It's a carefully crafted revenge that started when Tim took my childhood away from me. The only way to kill the boogeyman is to turn on the light. Thanks for listening to Chapter 5 of Lords of Death. Chapter 6 will be released next month in December. Music in this episode was contributed by M. Ross Perkins, George Miller, and Thrasher Banks. The song Habits contributed by Cutouts, along with this song titled Mantra. Additionally, the song Cruisin' with Drink was contributed by Pleasures. Artwork contributed by Cody Cunningham. Additional thanks to the numerous sources who put their lives and reputation on the line to help tell this story. You know who you are. If you have information relating to the case, please reach out to the team at Lords of Death at 937-985-3469 and leave us a voicemail. Or reach out to us on social media via Facebook or Twitter.